Welcome back. The panel joins us from their remote location, syndicated columnist George Will, NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker, and Anna Palmer, senior Washington correspondent for Politico. A great trio this morning. Welcome to all. Kristen Welker, I want to start with Robert Mueller's op-ed pushing back on the president's decision to commute Roger Stone's sentence. Under the headline, Roger Stone remains a convicted felon, and rightly so, he writes. He lied about the identity of his intermediary to WikiLeaks. He lied about the existence of written communications with his intermediary. He lied by denying he had communicated with the Trump campaign about the timing of WikiLeaks releases. He, in fact, updated senior campaign officials repeatedly about WikiLeaks, and he tampered with a witness imploring him to stonewall Congress. And you're reporting, Kristen Welker, that the president is basically alone, apparently, in that West Wing in being in favor of this decision. Did he really push back on every single advisor on this?
It seems as though he pushed back on most advisors, Chuck. According to conversations with multiple officials, he was counseled against this move by some of his top aides, including by the Attorney General. And yet President Trump moved forward with this decision. And look, his aides, Chuck, were saying to them, this could be politically risky. This could ultimately cost you. Your base supports you because they wanted you to build the wall and drain the swamp. And this winds up looking like a very swampy move, as one aide said to me. President Trump right now trailing in the polls to Joe Biden, and a lot of aides are concerned that he's not going to be able to afford these types of missteps, Chuck.
Anna Palmer, your ear to the ground on Capitol Hill is second to none. Mitt Romney speaking out, not a surprise. Pat Toomey, while I'm not surprised, he's somebody that is very careful when he comes out and criticizes this president. But he also seems to speak for that in between, the never-Trumper world and the devotees. He seems to speak for them on this one. How big is that caucus in the Senate of Pat Toomey and Mitt Romney?
I think it's a pretty lonely circle in terms of the number of Republican senators who are willing to actually step forward and speak out. I think what Pat Toomey channeled was a little bit of what you hear behind the scenes with Senate Republicans. What they won't say publicly, but they do say privately, is this is not helpful for November, their own reelections. I think they are gravely concerned with what the president is doing on this and several other issues, but they just don't seem to have the ability or the wherewithal to publicly condemn this president. You saw Lindsey Graham, one of his, big boosters, come out and defend the president here. I don't expect you're going to see a number of other Republicans want to take questions about this when they come back in a week or so, or be willing to publicly state that they feel like the president was wrong.
George Will, there's a lot of even Richard Nixon didn't do this writing this morning.
Well, Nixon didn't, because in this case, Mr. Trump is pardoning someone who's involved in an episode involving the president and who was involved to protect the president. And that's not speculation, because Mr. Stone bragged that I will not, listen to the language, I will not roll over on the president. Yeah. That's gangster talk. It's mob talk. Now, there comes a point, Chuck, in the downward spiral of our country at this point where worse is better. That is, if you have a sort of gangster regime, that ought to be made really clear. And I think this does make that really clear with the kind of language they're using. Mr. Trump will not be hurt by this among those who are the only people he cares about, which are his base. Mr. Trump ran for president promising to overturn and smash and pulverize the norms that govern American politics. So chalk up the Stone commutation to keeping another promise.
Kristen Welker, to me what's even more stunning and potentially tone deaf about this decision was the timing of it. On doing it on Friday, never mind, the president's entire day on Friday seemed tone deaf. He goes to the hottest spots of the virus, Miami-Dade County, not to talk about the virus, but to talk about Venezuelan politics. Then he has a fundraiser in Tampa. Then he commutes Roger Stone. Meanwhile, we have a virus. I mean, that to me is what makes this potentially so lethal to the president. A year ago, he might have gotten away with this more than he is now. I think a lot of people are wondering, what are you focused on here?
And remember, Chuck, when you think about the timing, it also came in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on his financial forms, which was broadly seen as a defeat. So you have a number of his close allies saying it looks like he was trying to turn the page on that Supreme Court decision by putting the focus on this decision to commute the sentence of Roger Stone. And you're right, Chuck, it did come on Friday when the president was in Florida, one of the hotspots, not talking about the virus, instead focusing on a key voting group. And it underscores what a lot of his officials are concerned is his inability to focus on what so many Americans are focused on right now, which is the virus, and deep concerns that it could ultimately wind up costing him, not with his base necessarily, Chuck, but with moderate Republicans, with independents, with undecided voters.
Anna Palmer, do Senate Republicans on Capitol Hill understand what the president is doing politically right now?
No, I really think that there is frustration among a lot of Republicans, and you've really started to see for the first time, if you look back over the past 4 years, Senate Republicans have largely been in lockstep. This is the party of Trump. But they are more and more worried as November gets closer about their own elections. You've started to see people like Senator Roy Blunt, John Thune, and others kind of raise a little bit of alarm that what the president is doing is not helpful when it comes to their own reelection, which is what they're always kind of most concerned about. And
George, I want to close with this, because here's what Max Boot wrote, and I'd love for you to respond. Max Boot, who's nobody would mistake for a liberal. I think he's someone like yourself, a conservative who just can't stomach President Trump. And he writes this: 3 months ago, I proclaimed Donald Trump the worst president ever. Oh, how innocent I was. Back then, I thought he was barely edging James Buchanan in the annals of presidential ineptitude. But now, with the commutation of Roger Stone's well-deserved prison sentence and so many other vile acts, he has disgraced the nation's highest office as no previous occupant has come close to doing. Is James Buchanan getting a reprieve because he was only inept and not inept and corrupt?
I think Buchanan's third on the list of worst presidents, but above him is the fierce competition between Donald Trump and Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who became president when Lincoln was shot, tried to reverse or minimize the consequences of the Civil War. He was a Klan-supporting man who supported only preserving the Union, not getting rid of what made the South distinctive at that time, which was slavery. Mr. Trump's damage is aesthetic. Some will say, I say aesthetics matter. It's to the tone of the country. It's to what is considered acceptable. It's to whether we have indeed norms at all anymore. And that is where the Stone commutation comes in, because it looks like a redundant demonstration on the part of the president that he simply doesn't care. He likes to smash up the crockery, and we're running out of crockery right now.
I know what we'd all think if we saw an Erdogan do something like this, a Putin or a Bolsonaro, that's for sure. All right. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.